You're standing in a medieval smith, watching a sword being made for real use. It's easy to picture one perfect bar of steel, but most blades began as mixed iron and carbon, changed by careful heating. In many European shops, after about 1100, the fire is pushed past 1200 C to make the metal behave. What you're seeing is a practical trade, shaped by fuel, skill, and what the metal will allow. You're inside a working smithy, right by the forge. This is the first real shaping moment. The steel stops being just a bar. It starts becoming a blade piece. Heat and hammer decide the starting form. You watch the bar slide into the coals. The color shifts toward orange. The smith pulls it out with tongs. He carries it straight to the anvil. The first blows land heavy and even. The face of the hammer stays flat. The steel spreads under each hit. At this heat, steel moves instead of fighting. The hammer does not cut it. It pushes it into a new shape. The anvil supports the force from below. That makes the metal flow sideways and forward. The smith turns the bar between blows. That keeps the change balanced and useful. But the color fades in seconds. You can see the surface darken. Each next strike asks for more effort. If he keeps hitting cold steel, it stops moving cleanly. The bar goes back toward the fire. Now it is a rough blank. It is ready to be drawn out longer. You're still in the same workshop space. Now the work shifts to length and shape. This is the step where a rough bar starts to look like a blade. What matters is choice, not just strength. Each choice sets the blade's balance and stiffness. You watch the steel warm in the forge. It comes out with a bright glow. It lands on the anvil with a dull ring. The smith strikes in a steady rhythm. The blows push metal lengthwise. The bar grows longer by small amounts. You can see a taper begin. One end stays thicker for the base. The far end narrows toward a tip. The steel moves because it is hot enough to flow. Hammering does not remove metal. It spreads it into new proportions. When the base stays thick, it stays strong. When the tip narrows, it cuts air easier. A gentle taper also saves weight near the end. That helps the blade feel livelier in the hand. The smith checks straightness by sight. Small bends are corrected, while the heat still helps. But the shape can drift with every heat. A few extra blows can thin one side. The blade can start to twist without looking dramatic. The taper can also become too steep. Then the blade may feel soft and whippy, so the smith slows down and watches closer. The next step will demand cleaner lines and tighter repeatability. You are still in the same smithy, but the mood shifts. The heavy forging is done, and the blade is now being controlled. This is the chapter where straightness and thickness get decided. It matters now, because small bends become hard habits in steel. You can feel the margin getting narrow. You see the blade laid across the anvil face. The smith sights down the edge like a straight road. A gentle tap lands on a high spot. Then the blade is turned and checked again. A flat file starts to hiss along the length. The smith pauses to feel the surface with a thumb. Near the base, the edge is touched with a tool. It leaves a small, clean line. Straightening works best with light contact. A small tap moves a bend without making a new one. Filing does the same kind of control. It removes metal from high areas, not from everywhere. That is how thickness becomes even from base to tip. Edge control is careful on purpose. A thicker edge stays calm in heat. A thin edge can wave as it warms. Heat decisions press in during these quiet steps. If the blade gets too hot here, it can sag under its own weight. If it stays too cold, it fights every correction. The smith watches the color, and also the speed of cooling. Each pass is a choice you cannot fully undo. When the blade looks right, in daylight, it is ready for harder heat. You are back at the forge, but the work feels different now. The blade looks close to finished from a distance. Up close, you can still see small ripples and uneven lines. This chapter sits at the fragile stage after careful shaping. Here, heat and stress can undo weeks of work. You watch the blade go into the fire again. It comes out a bright orange, then rests on the anvil. The smith checks straightness by eye and by touch. A quick tap lands near the tip. Another tap lands near the base. Then the blade goes back to the coals to even out. Steel moves when heat makes it soft. It also remembers strain when it cools. If one side cools faster, the blade bends toward that side. If the inside holds a hidden flaw, stress can open it into a crack. A tiny crack can run a few centimeters in seconds. Once it starts, the blade rarely stays trustworthy. The shop has limits that show up here. The fire is uneven, and the steel does not heat perfectly. Water in the quench tub can be too cold one day. A good blade can still warp in a heartbeat. So the smith pauses and decides what survives. The next step depends on that decision. You're in the quiet part of the workshop now. The heavy forging is mostly finished. The blade has survived its hardest moments. Now it needs careful finishing. This is where a blade becomes a sword. It happens through grinding, fitting, and final assembly. You see the blade clamped to a low bench. A coarse stone wheel turns nearby. The maker brings the edge to the stone. The sound changes as steel meets grit. Sparks slide away in thin lines. The surface turns smoother with each pass. The fuller is cleaned and evened. The point is corrected by tiny changes. Then the tang is checked for straightness. The guard is brought to the tang. It stops, then seats a little farther. Grinding removes small highs and bends. It also sets the final thickness near the edge. Too much grinding makes the blade weak. Too little leaves it clumsy in hand. The guard must fit tight on the shoulders. That joint blocks wobble during use. A wooden grip is shaped to the tang. It is drilled, then carved to match. The pommel adds balance at the rear. It also locks the grip in place. Everything lines up along one center line. This work can undo earlier success. A blade can heat up during grinding. Even around 200 C can soften a fine edge. So the maker pauses and cools it often. Fit can also fail by a hair. A tiny gap at the guard will grow with movement. The pieces are adjusted again and again. When the hilt finally sits firm, the sword feels complete. Now it is ready to face real handling and proof. You are now looking at the finished sword in open air. The polish and fittings are done, and it looks complete. But this moment is not about looks anymore. This is where the maker asks one simple thing. Can this sword be trusted in use? You see the blade lifted and held at arm's length. The maker rolls it slowly to catch the light. A thumb runs along the edge, careful and brief. Then the sword is swung in clean arcs. You can hear the air shift around it. The point is set on a mark, and the hands settle. A few cuts follow, each one controlled. These motions show how the sword behaves under force. A good blade returns true after a swing. It does not wobble or twist in the hand. The edge should bite without skidding. The spine should stay firm without feeling brittle. Balance matters here more than shine. If the weight sits right, the blade tracks straight. Even a small flaw shows up fast in this kind of use. A loose guard can rattle after a few strikes. A soft edge can roll and lose its line. A brittle edge can chip on a hard target. The maker watches for these signs in silence, because after this, the sword will meet time, sweat, and repeated contact. You are outside the smithy now. The sword is no longer a project. It is a tool on a belt. This chapter stays with the years after making. You are watching how use changes the blade. This is where its real value shows. You see the edge after a day's travel. Small bright spots catch the light. They are tiny chips and rolled metal. The blade comes out for cleaning at dusk. A cloth drags dark grease away. A whetstone follows, slow and steady. The sound is soft and gritty. Sometimes the tip is checked against a nail. Sometimes the guard is tightened by hand. The scabbard gets shaken for grit. The edge changes because steel meets harder things. It meets bone, wood, and iron rings. Each contact pushes the very edge out of line. Sharpening fixes that, but it also removes metal. Over months, the blade grows narrower. The balance shifts a little toward the hilt. A bent section can be straightened with care. A deep crack cannot be wished away. Heat can help a repair, but it risks softening the edge. Wear does not arrive all at once. It gathers in quiet places, like the base of the blade. Dirt in a scabbard can scrape steel every step. A missed oiling invites rust by morning dew. A careless sharpening can leave a wavy edge. A loose pommel can turn safe swings into risky ones. So the sword becomes a record of choices. When you look at it now, you can almost read its life.